Hey, Randy here. Thank you for clicking into the sermon for this week. I hope we can be a benefit or a blessing to you as you watch and listen. And our prayer is that Jesus would become more real to you than ever before. God bless you. If you're new, we're in the middle of a series on the letter of First Corinthians. Paul wrote this letter to the Corinthian church. He actually planted the church a couple years earlier, and he went away, and they became a mess. It's kind of like when mom leaves for the day, and the kitchen's clean, and the TV room is good, and everything's fine, and she comes back 4 hours later, and it was like a bomb went off in the house. It's the same here. It would be like one of the kids calling mom and going, "Mom, I have been perfect today, Mom. You just need to know, but my siblings have destroyed the house, and just so be aware of that." So as Paul is looking back, he's getting letters, and they're saying things are a mess, things are a mess. And so he writes this letter, which we call First Corinthians today. And so the first chapter, chapter 1, has to do with one. That is unity. He's not looking at it. He wants to make sure that the church of Corinth, so let's say it'd be like the church of Anthem. And so, and that's how I feel so much of the time up here in Anthem. I run into people who worship at other churches. We fellowship with other pastors, and so those men and women that are in leadership in all the local churches. But in a lot of ways, we are one. And so we gather at Amped, or we gather at Starbucks, or we gather at weddings and funerals, and we're all one. And so Paul is saying, remember, you're not following a person, you're following Jesus. And then chapter 2, he's saying, you're called to be foolish, meaning this, that your eyes have to be on Jesus. And there will be things that you decide in your life. There'll be things that you do in your life. There's things that you believe, the things that you place confidence in that is not considered wise or intellectual in the eyes of the world. And so you are called to actually be foolish. There will be moments in your life that you will do things that others around you will say, that's crazy or that's foolish. But you know that God's called you to that, or you pick up the scriptures and you know the truth of what he wants and what's best for you. So 1 is unity, 2 is foolishness. Number 3 is we learn that our lives have to be on the foundation of Jesus. And there's a lot of good things. There's family that we can build our life on, or there could be education, and it could be our careers and good careers. It could be nonprofit endeavors, and there's lots of good things that we can build our foundation on. But Paul says our foundation has to be on Jesus and Jesus alone. And last week we talked about called to be a lowly servant. Chapter 4, verses 1 and 2 says this is how we should regard us, as servants of Christ and stewards of the mystery of God. Moreover, it is required of stewards that they be found faithful. So he says, more than anything else, your talent, your skills, your resources, your abilities, whatever you're looking at, I want you to know that I'm calling you to be faithful more than anything else in your life. You do that, and you will meet me, and I will say you are a good and faithful servant. And that's his goal for us. And now we move to chapter 5. And as I read 1 Corinthians chapter 5, it's a little shorter, I want you to think about the sin in chapter 5, and I want you to have this imagery of cancer in your mind. And as I found a kind of a lonely spot back here, which was kind of nice, and in a comfy chair, and as I was just thinking and praying about this message, something came to my mind that I really loved for me, and maybe it'll help you. If we view sin in someone's life or in the church as something that is just doing bad, fun things, we're not understanding sin. But if we keep in mind that sin in our lives and in the church is a cancer, that is, its purpose is to destroy, then our perspective of sin changes radically. 1 Corinthians 5, read with me. It's actually reported that there is sexual immorality of cancer among you, and of the kind that is not tolerated even among pagans. For a man has his father's wife, and you are arrogant. Ought you not rather to mourn? Let him who has done this be removed and among you. For though absent in body, I'm present in spirit. As if present, I have already pronounced judgment on the one who did such a thing. When you are assembled in the name of the Lord Jesus, and my spirit is present with the power of the Lord Jesus, you are to deliver this man to Satan for the destruction of the flesh, so that his spirit may be saved in the day of the Lord. Your boasting is not good. Do you not know that a little leaven leavens the whole lump? Cleanse out of you the old leaven, that you may be a new lump, as you really are unleavened. For Christ, our Passover lamb, has been sacrificed. And let us therefore celebrate the festival not with old leaven and the leaven of malice and of evil, but with the unleavened bread of sincerity and of truth. And I wrote to you in my letter not to associate with sexual immoral people, not all meaning the sexual immoral of this world or the greedy and the swindlers and the idolaters, since you would need to go out to the world. But now I'm writing to you not to associate with anyone who bears the name of the brother, who is guilty of sexual immorality or greed or who's an idolater or rival or drunkard or swindler. Don't even eat with them. For what I have to do with the judging outside, it is not those inside the church whom you are to judge. God judges those outside. Purge the evil person from among you. God, I pray that you take this tricky passage and help us to make it real applicable today. We're not asking for a hammer, although if that's what happens, it happens. But God, just give us direction. Give us some boundaries. Give us some bumpers that we can just kind of move through life with here. And you've laid out some pretty important stuff. I hope we can apply it to our lives for our life even this week. Amen. There's 4 things that we need to understand about these people. There's 4 groups of people at play in Corinthian. There's actually 4 groups of people just about anywhere, but Paul just kind of has 4 audiences at any given moment. And the first one is it's the Christian sinner. And that is the person who has had sexual relations with his father's wife. And in fact, in verse 1 of 1 Corinthians, it says, it is actually reported there's sexual immorality among you, and that kind not tolerated even by the pagans. Now, pagan is used for a term that is kind of a derogatory word. Well, in most places. Some people may carry that as a badge of honor. But I think for the most part, people would be like a little put off if they were called a pagan. But this was really a group of people who lived in such a way that they just, anything goes. And they had a disconnect between their spiritual self and their physical self. That's a message all of its own, and I so wish I had time to talk about that. That has permeated all through the New Testament and even in the church today, that the things that we do or the way we spend our money or the people that the things that we consider a priority, we create departments or compartments for our lives. And the pagans were really good at this. We can also get pretty good at this too. That we have our hour or two at church, or we do this for the nonprofit, or we give this to those that are in need, but then we go back and then we live 2 lives. We call that hypocrisy in a lot of places, right? And so the first group is, first of all, is that Christian sinner. By the way, this chapter is not directed to him. His address or his conversation is not with that guy. It's so bad, even the pagans know that that's wrong. And so that's not his main concern here. Stay with me. Number 2, it's the non-believers. So it's the pagans themselves. He addresses them and says, even that group understands how messed up that is. That's crazy that someone could live like that. So the non-believers are, in fact, the Greeks were really good at naming people and giving like funny titles. The Greeks those folks out of Athens, they would have, in Athens, would have done really, really well with Twitter. They were very quick, they were very witty, and they summarized things well. In fact, the Greeks called the people, and they knew how bad the church in Corinth was, and so they had a name called those that live a Corinthian life. It would be like saying someone who lives a Vegas Strip life. And in your mind, you go, okay, I know exactly what that is. I've been to Atlantic City, I've been to Vegas, I know what that life would be like. So back then, it would be someone who lives a Corinthian life, and then there's a third group, and that is those that follow Jesus. Those are the healthy ones without cancer, and those that hate cancer. Those are the ones that understand there are times in my life that I'm going to have to do things and say things that are going to go against my nature. It's going to go against my body. It's not going to feel right. It's going to feel like I'm all stuffy or too strict or legalistic. But there's times that God calls us to that. And that's the spiritual people who live in a different realm and understand that our relationship with God is more important than the things that we do and the liberties that we take. And then the fourth is the Corinthian church themselves. And the message today is all about that group. And it's all about you and me. In the next couple minutes, this message hits hard in a very unique fashion. It comes from the side, and Paul is giving us some very clear but strict orders. And here's what's dangerous. That if I don't handle this correctly, particularly if you're new, you may leave and feel like we are legalistic. And that's not my goal. It wasn't Paul's goal. What's happening here is Paul says, listen, you are called to deal with sin. And what he's really saying is, you're called to deal with the cancer in your church. And as soon as I took that and changed the word from sin to spiritual cancer, it just made sense. I have a friend who was just diagnosed with stage 4. And it was a growth on his chest, and it got large, and it got bigger, and he refused to go to the doctor. There are two types of people in the world. Those who put off the doctor and the dentist as long as they can, and there's those that are chicken like me, and they go as fast as they can because they want to deal with it soon. How many of you are the first that, okay, everyone on this side of the room, that's unique. How many of you are like me that you're chicken and you want to go now before the, yeah, thank you, so am I, I'm the same way. Thank you, Jen. So his message is, I want you to address the sin, the spiritual sin of your church. But he doesn't stop there. He gives some directions. In the next couple minutes, we're going to rip quickly through these. Here are the parameters. It's kind of like going to the doctor, and there's a triage, and then they start sending you to different places, and they know how to handle this. You're not the first to have this kind of cancer, and so they go, okay, this is where you're going to go here. We have it all laid out, and there is a plan. Just addressing the cancer of a body isn't good enough. You've got to have a good plan that has history. Well, here Paul gives his plan, and the first one, number one, if you're taking notes, is he says, you need to mourn over the sin. And that comes from verse 2, and it says, ought you not rather to mourn? And the word mourn comes from a Greek word that says it's patheo, which means it's manifested grief. Literally, he says, view the sin of the church, whether it's greed or idolatry or drunkenness or whatever it is, and grieve. If I get nowhere except that point today, it's enough for me. Because the opposite of grief is disgust and self-righteousness. And one of the reasons why the evangelical church can take a hit every once in a while is because we look down our long nose and we look at the spiritual and relational cancer of the church or in someone's family and someone's life, and we think, oh, not me. And it's easy. Nothing puts off someone more. And right out of the gate, the first thing he says in verse 2 is he says, mourn the fact that someone's in bondage. And that bondage is killing their family and their marriage and work and their bodies. Mourn it. And when I have someone confront me with something going on in my life, I'll tell you, I respond a lot better when they come and go, man, I just saw this and it saddens me. Is this something that you're struggling with? Is this something that's going on in your life and is something I can help with? Versus, how dare you? You can be so selfish. And I know that there's way more than sexual immorality. I understand there's hostility and anger, and there's drunkenness, there's chemical dependencies, and there's all kinds of things. I mean, we have all figured out ways to go sideways, right? In so many different ways. And if you're a Christian leader like me, you can find ways that are less noticeable. There's some vices that I can't pick up. But if I wasn't a pastor, I might. Not because I'm godly, it's because I'm chicken or I don't want to lose my job. But what if I got really serious with God and I said, my pride is wrapped up into my whole world. And the cancer of pride, of the things I've accomplished, or the things that I feel like I should accomplish, or the way people may talk to me or view me, and what if the Holy Spirit said, I want you to mourn over your pride. And I don't want you to view it as, well, it's just the way I am, or it's a character flaw. But what if God says, do you understand the arrogance in your life? And I go, oh, man. Whether people see it or not, because I can be so good, some of you good too, that I can hide it. Some of you aren't as good as you think, but that's another message. So Paul says, before you do anything, before you even lift a finger, mourn the sin that you see happening in the church. 2, he says, deliver the sin to Satan. I could not think of a good way to type that. That doesn't sound real good, right? Be hard to have someone come in the office and go at the end, okay, this kind of wraps it up. I'm now officially delivering you to Satan. Grab a bottle of water as you're walking out. Verse 5, it says, you are to deliver this man to Satan for the destruction of the flesh, so that his spirit may be saved at the day of the Lord. Paul says, this is how serious I want you to view sin in the church for the believers. Not those that are outside, they're pagans. But for those who profess Jesus, someone needs to address this. Here's a crazy illustration, and this is only because I've been doing this meeting at this CrossFit gym for about a month now, but I'm just kind of picturing, I go to work, and it's at the end of the day, and I'm really tired, and so I walk in, and we start warming up, and I look in the corner of my eye at the entrance, after we've all kind of circled up and we're doing our stretches, which I am pathetic at, which I'm glad none of this is on social media. It's just best for everybody involved. And some guy walks in with 12 Sweetheart donuts and a 6-pack of beer, and he pushes in a Lazy Boy. And he sits in the Lazy Boy, and he lights up a cigar, and he's eating donuts, and he's got chips and salsa, and that's where things get messy for me. And I look to my trainer, and I go, what are you going to do about him? And she says, we just let everybody in. They have a dozen Sweetheart donuts. And he's working against everything we're trying to do. And then he starts mocking me. He goes, oh, you call that a squat? And I'm like, it's the best I got. And so he starts mocking everyone in the room while just devouring, eating, and drinking and smoking in his Lazy Boy. And once the hour is up, he packs it all up, and he takes the Lazy Boy, puts it in his truck, and goes on his way, and next week he comes back. And we would not tolerate that for one reason, because he's going against everything that the CrossFit gym is standing for. And Paul says, deliver this man to Satan for the destruction of the flesh. Meaning, if that's the direction that they want to go, then so be it. But don't stay in the church. Why do that? Why live two lives? Why, when the musicians are going and our hands are in the air and everything's great and we're singing, and then we go out and live like that? That doesn't make any sense. And it would be really easy to assume that everyone is always welcome, and they are, by the way. You can't say that anymore. I mean, the Church of Corinth was one group of people. And so today, the Church of Anthem is everywhere. There's great churches everywhere. We live across the street from Bella Rosa not Bella Rosa. What's the Catholic church? I don't even know where I live. St. Rose over by the new dog park, and so then they worship a different thing, and then you got all these good churches everywhere and all these good people, and you can't just kick someone out of the church because there's great churches and great pastors everywhere. So it's kind of hard to correlate that to today, but what he's saying is let them live that life, but protect the group. Number 3, I gotta keep moving here. Number 3 is, he says, be humble. Verse 6, your boasting is not good. And what is he boasting about? Paul is looking at this group, and they're boasting about how good they are and how smart they are and how much money they made and how successful they are and how much they give to the temple. And they're just boasting and boasting and boasting. And Paul says, you guys are just pathetic. You're not near as good as you think you are. And the first thing he shifts into gear, and he says, where is your humility? My pastor for years, who's 90-something and still alive and still kicking and still preaching, it's awesome. He used to say something that my brother and I remembered 1,000,000 times. And he said, don't ever believe your own press release. I love that. And today it would be, don't believe your own Twitter posts. You're not near as good as you think you are. Be humble. Number 4, don't ignore it. And I think that's the story of this whole thing. Don't ignore it. And I get that from chapter 5, verse 6 and 7. Do you not know that a little leaven leavens the whole lump? Cleanse out the old leaven that you may be a new lump as you are already leavened. And what he is saying is the spirit of the church cannot tolerate this kind of arrogance and corruption. And if the church tolerates those things, then the cancer, according to this text in the illustration of the leaven, it will grow. And I saw a video online this past week of leaven in a jar and how you add a little bit of yeast and it grows and grows and grows. And he says, address it before it grows and takes over. Like a bad movie, like The Glob from Seattle. It just kind of takes over a whole city. But that's what he's saying happens with the sin if it's not tolerated. And then I started thinking, why do I tolerate it? Why don't I address it? Well, if I have opportunity and it's appropriate and I have relationship and they know that I love them, why is it that I keep my mouth shut? And I wrote down 3 reasons. Number 1 is I think that I don't want to rock the boat. And then I think I don't want to appear self-righteous. And 3, I don't want to judge. And number 4, this is probably the biggest. Who am I? And if we view that kind of relational, spiritual cancer as damaging to that person, I think I would be a lot less hesitant. Because I'm not coming down. I'm not trying to change their behavior. I'm not trying to look like I'm better. I'm just saying, this cannot be helping you in life. Paul says, don't ignore it. If you're reluctant to address it in a close friend or family member's life, then you're probably prepared to address it. But if you're eager to address it and enjoy it, you're the last candidate for the job. And you know and I know that when someone comes to me to address something in my life, I know the difference. And if I sense a haughtiness, like I would never do that. And how dare you do that? I resist. I'll say the right things just so they could leave. But if someone comes to me with humility and care and sensitivity, and they want to hear me, they want to know me, they want to lift me up and support me, man, I'm way more likely to go, oh, you're right. I'm like, it's all right, man. Let's work through it. I know, my wife's been nagging me, and I know. She's sick and tired of it. I know, I get it. Man, do I have the reasons not to address it, and I think we all need to get over that. And last one, number 5, is disassociate ourselves with the person with the spiritual or relational cancer. Verse 11, I'm writing to you not to associate with anyone who bears the name of the brother, that is, they're believers, if he's guilty of sexual immorality or greed or adultery, and it gives a list. And I think to myself, it's not unusual for people to read this and read excommunicate. That is not what's going on here. In fact, the word for don't associate is actually means do not have an intimate relationship that is close. Let it not be one of your closest friends. Some of you have this close friends group that you have. You have 2 or 3 people that are in your life that you can say anything to. Maybe you only have one, but All he's saying is, don't let that be the person that you have that heart-to-heart deep connection with, because it's like leaven. And I think about the need to protect others and to protect me, and knowing that yeast grows and they're not healthy and they're not in a good place. And all he's saying is, don't have that intimate relationship. But if they want to meet for coffee or lunch and they've got something going on in their life, then I want to be the first one to go. I wish I had a nickel for every time I've had a man in my office just in tears break down because of a conversation that has happened around the spiritual and relational cancer in their lives, and they get to the point where the Holy Spirit does all the work and they just break. And you hear from family members afterwards going, he is a different person. I know. They say, what'd you do? And I go, I didn't do anything. I just pointed them to Jesus. And I so badly want us to be a church that we don't tolerate sin, but we don't tolerate it because we're better. We don't tolerate it because it's like cancer in their lives, and we want to come in and we want to support them, and we want them to experience life in its fullness. And you think of cancer and all that it represents physically, it's the same that it does for us spiritually, and it's the same that it does for us relationally. And physically, you can kind of detect it and you can kind of deal with it. And spiritually, here's the problem. It deals with pride. And pride becomes the number one enemy of getting healthy. Paul says, you got a goofball who is sinning at a level that even the pagans go, what is he doing? He's a freak. And he says, that's not my problem. My problem is you guys tolerating it. And the whole church goes, what did we do? Paul says, you're being cowards is what you're doing. And someone needs to deal with them. And yes, and hopefully he'll go and be disassociated and let him live his life and let him do his thing the way he wants. But our prayer is for him to come back, but also our prayer is to protect the body. It's a weird message. Do you guys get my email? It's a weird, I told you it was going to be a weird one. You can't skip over certain chapters. People go, what was it about that one? Next week, you want weird? I'm going to give you triple weird next week. That's not a promise. That's just what it's going to happen. And it's going to take lot of thought and a lot of prayer. But as Paul addresses the Corinthian church, I think there's something for us. For the Western church. Let's not be afraid to address the spiritual and relational cancer in each of our lives.